Hey, what's up, everyone? So I did a video a couple of days ago on impossible or sort of hard to find EU items, books and comics and things like that. And I got a lot of good comments back from things that you guys sort of find hard to find or sort of impossible or out of reach. And as I was doing that video, I was realizing there's obviously a much longer list of things that you could also add. There's so much EU, and there's so much now that's like in danger of either becoming impossible to find or just so priced out of reach that like it'll never really be accessible by realistically speaking, sort of the average fan. So I thought I would just make a second video, but I realized actually that it's clearly the case that having done a number of live streams recently, and I've actually made quite a few of them private. I've done a lot recently. That like YouTube clearly preferences my live streams now. So I've kind of screwed myself. So I have to do this if I want most of my subscribers to see these. Live streams just seems to be the thing that it's pushing the most to people who are subscribed. So I thought I would do this. So now there's going to be, a first sort of round video, and now there'll be this. We'll sort of see, they'll kind of compete with each other. We'll sort of see which does better. But just a quick list here, and I might come back with like a third video at some point because there's clearly a much longer list. And again, I would love to know the sorts of things that you guys have found impossible to find or a little out of reach. What are the things that you guys are still looking for? I'd be really interested to know. I'm a little out of it in some ways when it comes to knowing the totality of the secondary market. On the side, I am a bookseller, and a book collector personally. And so I do spend a lot of time trying to keep up with just trends in everything from Star Wars books to philosophy books and things like that. But, I can't keep I can't keep a handle on all of the EU anymore in the way that I used to. My impression anecdotally is that all prices are rising, right? So it's probably bad news for anyone sort of diving in to begin their collection. So let me just check on something real quick. And to find my list here. The first one is one that was suggested. Matt Wilkins mentioned the Ewok Annual #2, and it's not really known as sort of like, I don't think it's really titled #2, but it's there's a first volume. The first volume comes around 85 or so, and they're both from the UK. And the first one is a very familiar cover image. You've seen it in a number of different places. It's it's basically a black cover with a rainbow, and the Ewoks are sort of riding the rainbow. Very iconic. Fairly easy to track down. The one that's like slightly harder to get, I wouldn't put it yet in the category of truly impossible or hard to get, but it's expensive to get, and it's not always available. It comes in waves. Hey, what's up? What's up, Alex? Just going through a new list of impossible or hard to get items. I'd put sort of the second volume of the Ewoks UK Annual and sort of like the slightly hard to get, slightly impossible to find. I did check; it is currently available on eBay. These things do pop up from time to time. It's worth it because although it collects a couple of comics from the old Marvel comic run, it does contain some original stories, and I don't know, to be honest, whether those additional stories have actually been contained anywhere else. So it's worth tracking down, just either as a completist or because you want to sort of get access to these things that I don't actually think you can read anywhere. It's probably worth making a digital copy of. It's so out of print and out of date at this point that it definitely needs to be made available to more people. But it's one of those things that I find a lot of folks don't know about because it was only available in the UK. So if you're looking for it, it's basically Google or search on eBay or whatever, Ewoks Annual UK, and just look for the one that comes a little later, around 1988, that has sort of the blue color scheme. You're not looking for the one with the rainbow cover. You don't necessarily need that one unless you're truly a completist, which I would totally respect. The second thing on the list that I thought of as I was doing that first video is something that's pretty unique in the context of the EU. Now, it actually is a Filoni Clone Wars tie-in. It's called The Way of the Warrior. Now, this is basically impossible to get in at least two respects. One is that it's just really hard to find. People don't really seem to sell them very often. And the other reason is that it was personalized. I think this is the first time this had happened, where you were basically able to, there was sort of a stock story. It's got some sort of superficial connections to the Clone Wars as well as other EU. But sort of a stock template story, and you were able to personalize it both in terms of how you were able to slightly tweak the sort of Jedi character you were able to effectively play in it. Actually, you could get a good version and a bad version, light side and dark side. But you were also able to put in your name or your friend's name or your kid's name, right? Which made it a really cool personal, piece of EU. I think that's one of the reasons why it's basically impossible to find, and why it would be impossible for you to find the most personalized version, because it's obviously not available to personalize anymore, and so if you ever were able to find one, you'd have to be comfortable sort of finding one with like someone else's name that was like specifically meant for someone else, personalized for someone else. But it's still a cool thing to find. I mean, it's really, really, really difficult to find them, in my experience, at least on the secondary market. And again, hopefully it's the case that it's because people sort of valued it and didn't want to get rid of them, right? It might be, though, that it's so obscure that it suffers the paradox of, it's so obscure no one knows that there's a demand for it, so no one's induced to actually go ahead and supply it in the secondary market. But fortunately, the stock template versions are available, as are most things, on StarWarsTimeline.net. So you can go find and read the story. There's not a PDF, but I think there's some version of it that you can download and read. You can sort of see the different cover versions, the light and dark side sorts of versions. But yeah, Way of the Warrior, it's not one I hear talked about a lot. I'm not sure how many people got in on it back in the day. This came out around 2010. So yeah, it's just, it kind of passed me by too, honestly. I wasn't particularly, I hate to always have to accidentally and unintentionally turn these into, streams that are critical of TCW. So I'll try and avoid that can of worms by simply saying, as I've mentioned elsewhere, the Floating Clone Wars was not exactly my thing. And I took a little bit of a break from Star Wars during that period of time. Although 2010 was a pretty great year. I've talked often about how Celebration 5, which is still to this day my favorite celebration, occurred that year. That was still an exciting time. It's just that I didn't have a super strong connection to the Floating Clone Wars. I probably didn't go out of my way to look for that sort of personalized bit of content. Fair enough. Hey, what's up, Dylan? Impossible to find EU. These Hasbro Legends fan poll winners. Yeah, if they keep making them exclusives. Yeah, I mean, one step forward, two steps back, right? I mean, thank goodness that an EU figure won, A, and that B, they actually recognize the results, and that C, they're actually going to produce it. But D, that here's the two steps back. It's like, yeah, they're making it pretty hard to for every fans to get them, But yeah, unfortunately, they'll be out of reach for folks who aren't pre-ordering. So go to theexpandinguniverse.com, read Dylan's article about this, about the pre-order, and see if you can get in on that. I hope you guys can. Otherwise, yeah, you're gonna have to spend a ridiculous amount of money on eBay to pick one up. Hey, what's up, Scott? Lunch break stream. Yeah, exactly, right? I figured, hopefully a lot of folks are at lunch, and so am I. And I was actually about to leave for lunch, and then I realized everyone in my house took the cars, so I can't actually leave. So I'm like, hey, you know what? Fine. Next best option, talk about the EU, right? So awesome. Well, good. Thanks for dropping in, Alex. Good to see you. Okay, interesting. Good to know. Dylan with the late breaking updates. Thank you very much for taking care of that article and those links. So yeah, I hope folks are getting them, and I hope they have success. I know Terry was posting that she was having some difficulty, I think, with the website. So I hope it's working out for everyone. But anyway, Way of the Warriors. I'd love to know if any of you guys have one, the old personalized TCW sort of children's tie-in. It's a really cool item, and I'm sort of surprised you didn't see more of that back in the day. But again, super, super hard to find. And as I said, if you found one that's going to be personalized for someone else, it'd be like buying an autographed baseball that's like made out to some kid you don't know, right? So sometimes that can be cool. Sometimes it can be kind of weird. Speaking of the Clone Wars and related tie-ins, this is fairly well known, but one of the harder to get because it's just so darn expensive set of EU items are like the tie-in novels, Gambit and Stealth and No Prisoner and things like that, then Wild Space, which the hardcover editions actually do exist, but they were only published in the UK, and they're insanely expensive when they do occasionally come up on the secondary market. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and if you ever see those, buy them, if they're at a reasonable price. Sometimes people don't know what they're selling, right? So if you find yourself in that fortunate position, buy them, because They're a cool collector's item. They're a unique, novel thing to have, right? Things that were not hardcover in America, only in the UK, and they're worth a crazy amount of money. Hey, Lance, doing good? Quick lunchtime stream here. Good to see you. Thanks for dropping in. Some of the RPG books are impossible to find. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Fantasy Flight and West End Game ones. Yeah, it's funny. Fantasy Flight, sort of our current RPG licensee, right? There are things that they've done, some sort of like some beta things and some like RPG day things. I know Scott and I have talked about offline from time to time that are just super crazy hard to find. And when they do occasionally become available are like incredibly expensive, right? I mean, the battles on eBay are nuts. And what's so interesting about gaming, right, is that this is one of these areas where you realize that, we as EU fans are part of one sort of sector of the broader Star Wars fandom, right? And that even within the EU, there's these overlapping sectors, right? I mean, I talked about Celebration a couple of minutes ago. There are communities of Star Wars fans who are pretty much just in it for the conventions, right? They love that, right? They love going to the different cons. There's like a whole sort of like underground scene of like Star Wars convention goer, like trade fan club, or like pin trading fan clubs and stuff like that, right? I mean, there's a lot of interesting niches. And so gaming obviously is its own niche, right? Objectively and within the Star Wars universe. And so if you're just your random EU fan interested in expanding your knowledge and collection of the lore, which you would need, if you want to, you need to go get the Fantasy Flight and West End Games and stuff like that. You're battling against gamers who just want this old stuff because they want to improve the depths of their gaming, so it's just to see the battles on eBay, right? The bidding wars, it's just really insane. But there's, again, even modern Fantasy Flight stuff's going nuts, but obviously the old West End Games. I mean, in the last couple of years, I've seen some stuff like very sadly go out of reach. There have been some like Lords of the Expanse, the old West End game. That was always crazy expensive, but even Darkstrider campaign, which is definitely something that everyone should, I think, strive to check out. Sort of like the short book within it. Even that's like crazy hard to find. And I'm trying to see if I've got access to it. Let me see if I can pull this out real quick. I'll be right back. This is, speaking of West End Games, this is a cool little artifact in my collection. I don't know if I've shown this before. This is actually, there's a nasty glare. This is actually the original printer's proof of the Darkstrider campaign box from West End Games. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. Definitely one of those things that, like as I say, is definitely an essential Legend sort of RPG sort of story collection, whatever. That's really hard to find in complete nice editions, right? That's not crazy expensive. So yeah, a lot of that stuff is it's pretty darn tough. The paperback spinoffs are not necessarily. No, it's the hardcover. There's hardcovers that were only published in the UK of like Wild Space and No Prisoners and Gambit and Stealth and things like that. Now, this actually brings me to the next item on my list, which is actually kind of a reverse of this in some ways. There was only a hardcover edition. This is also pretty well known, but there's also only a hardcover edition of Karen Travis's novelization of the Clone Wars movie. Only a hardcover in America, but in the UK, right? What's so odd is there's a paperback version. So it's one of the only of a very small list of EU books that don't actually have hardcover books that don't have a paperback edition. If you want one, you've got to go over and get it. So it won't be a Del Rey one, right? It'll be whatever, I think it's Arrow or whatever the licensee is in the UK. So kind of a fun fact, right? You can find the paperback pretty readily available in American eBay secondary markets. It's just that, yeah, there's just no like official Del Rey one. Go figure. I've heard some people say, oh, well, maybe we'll someday see one, with the continued interest in the Clone Wars and the new canon, or this, Legends, Essential Legends collection that Del Rey's putting out. And the trick there is I just don't ever see them doing novelizations, particularly something like that, of that book. It's just so confusing given that really would sow a lot of confusion, uncertainty in the fandom. I mean, I still see people on the new canon side assume that because the Clone Wars got sort of introduced into the new canon, that all the tie-ins and things did, including the novelization. And, you know, it's like, it's always sad to have to break it to folks that like the novelizations of all of the films, including Clone Wars, are not part of the new canon, right? And so they don't have the Legends banner, but they're Legends, right? They're certainly not officially sort of new canon. It's very confusing, right? So, but yeah, but basically an impossible thing to get, in other words, is an American version of a, you know, Karen Travis paperback version of the Clone Wars novelization. Not like many people are necessarily looking for that, but that is the case. Arrow, that's right, yeah. Oh, cool. Yep, probably, yep. Very interesting. Every once in a while, I know it's frustrating. I remember years ago, I'd see like, even in Barnes and Noble in the States, in like the discount bin, I would sometimes see Arrow versions. I don't know why that was the case, how that was happening, but every once in a while I'd see Arrow stuff sort of like wash back into the American market. It was really fascinating, got kind of confusing. Yep. Bummer. Hello there. Good. Yeah. Well, it's a fun journey. It's fun to go on the hunt. So happy hunting. I hope you find them all. Good luck. And I hope we can all share, you know, if we're ever like stuck finding something, you know, I hope we can all kind of, you know, share that, you know, let us know. I'm always looking for things, right? So I'm always aware of what stuff's available and not. So if anyone ever needs help tracking things down, let me know. Yeah, that's a little confusing, isn't it? Yeah, for sure. Okay, so a couple of other things on my sort of short list here that came to mind. One is this is just more obscure. It's something that I tout a lot, and I was talking about with someone earlier this morning on a Discord server. So I thought, yeah, you know, it makes sense to. I was reminded of it again. It's these Del Rey samplers. They're pretty commonplace now. For the EU, the only ones that are relevant are 2012 and 2013. They really don't exist in sort of the current form. They are like really prior to that, and the 2014 is not relevant. It's advertising, at least for purely for the EU. It's advertising a lot of stuff that was going to come later. So the 2012 and 2013, what's cool about them, like a lot of samplers, they have snippets of some of the books that were forthcoming, but the really neat thing is that they have complete reprintings of a lot of the Titan Insider short stories. Now, most of those, if not all, were later reprinted in, you know, EU paperbacks, but it's just a cool way of giving an extra little bit of spotlight to some of these short stories if you're interested in sort of seeing them on the shelf, sort of in a distinct form outside of the paperbacks. Right now, here's what's cool about the Titan collections that have come out recently. You know, we've got volume 1, it looks really good. Volume 2 is coming out. Hopefully we get volume 3, 4, 5, or 6, however many we need to get all of the short stories back out. I think that those Titan hardcover collections are starting to make the samplers unnecessary. But again, if you're a completist, don't forget the samplers is a cool way of, again, as I say, sort of kind of shining a bit of a spotlight just on the short stories themselves if you're interested in having it all up on your shelf. So those are a cool thing to track down. But why are they impossible? The 2013 isn't that so impossible, but 2012, I don't know why. It's just super hard to find. Again, it was a free item. You got it at a convention. Most people chucked them out. I've talked about this before in videos. In my basement flood, my horrible, infamous basement flood that threatened most of my EU collection, I ended up faring pretty well, and I've been able to build back some of the things that were taken away. There were a couple things that were lost that were fairly sort of like one of a kind, but those samplers got hit pretty hard, and I held on to them. They were totally messed up, right? But they weren't in danger of being too moldy or anything like that. So I held on to them long enough to track down 2 new copies, and I eventually got rid of the old ones. They were in way too bad a shape to really pass on to anyone. So amazingly, miraculously, I was actually able to find another 2012 version. So I'd have to put it in the nearly impossible camp, but still pretty darn hard to track down. The UK books that I bought that I thought were the German YA ones. Let me see if I've got one right here to show you. The quick background for anyone who doesn't know is there are these really cool. Oh, I don't know if you know this quality, but I don't know if you know the people doing this, but there's a group of guys I just encountered who are actually translating those four German YA ones in English, which should be cool for North American fans who aren't aware of them or who can't read German. But the reason I, and I can't find them now, I'll tell you what, you know what, unless this is it. I haven't even opened this one up. Let's see. They turned out to be adaptations of the original trilogy. Now, the reason I thought that they might have been English versions of the German YA novels is because I think I'd seen your Reddit thread or something about them once. So I had this really vague recollection of what the covers were. And when I saw these online, they just looked vaguely familiar. Again, I was totally wrong. Here's what they were. These are 2 of 4. So interestingly, it was also a 4-part set, which made me think, hey, wait a minute. These are them. These are published by, I think, Reed's Children's Books in the UK. You can search them by just looking for like Star Wars mini books. Again, for all I know, maybe they are. I don't know. I mean, they look similar to me, but I don't think they are the same. But yeah, I mean, basically, these are just like novelization of the original trilogy. You see just different pictures and stuff like that. There's a ton of things like this in the EU that you always really have to decide for yourself whether or not close. Yeah, I mean, it was one of them in particular was I was like, no, I forget which one it is. It might be the Vader one or something. I've got the other 2 upstairs. I was like, I really think this is it. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in the EU that like. At the end of the day, it really is just an adaptation of the films, and you just have to really decide for yourself how much of a completist you really are. It turns out, I mean, I was aware of these things. In fact, I might even have them in some other pile or something, but it was worth the chance to import them again from the UK. You don't need them. You don't need those novelizations, the old stuff, if you're a completist. But hey, if you're a completist and you've got the sickness, you got to go for it anyway. So, but they're fun to have. Cool thing to pass on to a kid or something to get them interested in reading Star Wars. Spencer, good to see you, man. Long time no talk. I hope fatherhood is suiting you well. I hope you're having a good time. I hope you're getting some sleep too. Yeah, uncorrected proofs. Going back to the Dark Strider thing here. Yeah, this was something that I discovered like by accident, just in my quest for more promo materials, and I wish I remember how I actually like what set of like search terms I used to sort of find that ultimately, but it was this part of my same process and reasoning for like, I just want more images of the book covers of the things I'm reading, right? And that happened to pop up. But, uncorrected proofs of books, right, themselves is also kind of a neat sort of like sub field in EU collecting. And I've got a number of them for the books that I really love, or just have some particular sort of like interest in, even some novelty in, I've got like the uncorrected proofs, so partly just to sort of troll a lot of the EU fandom, I have like every possible version of Crystal Star, right? I mean, every possible version from, the hardcover to the different paperbacks, without legends, of course, the error edition that came out last year. And then of course I had to have the uncorrected proof. And I even actually have kind of like this Dark Strider thing, I have a proof of that cover too, the paperback. So I was like, cool, I've just got it all, not my favorite book, but it was one of those things that it's like, it gets talked about so much, I couldn't help but feel like I need to kind of defend the underdog, So now I've just got the complete, I've got a truly complete collection of Crystal Star stuff. I think I remember that. And hey, it's got some stories in it, right? So it's not the worst thing in the world, I guess. Getting caught up here. Thank you very much, Michael. Good to see you. Appreciate it. Yep, very nice of Matt to have me on so I can pose my perspective on the Star Wars fandom. Yes, it's so funny that you mentioned that because that's next on my list. That was next on my list. It's really uncanny. The Old Republic Encyclopedia, 2012. So obviously it's missing some stuff, it'd be great to get an update someday. I don't know that we will. We might have to get one unofficially for more SWTOR stuff. But yeah, it's just crazy how expensive that is, and it's a real shame because that's something that there's clearly such sort of demand for, growing demand. It's and it's even something that is obviously of great interest to folks seemingly on the new canon side who keep sort of speculating about to what extent they're going to try and reintroduce elements of the Old Republic into the new canon. So there's just a massive audience for it, and yeah, I feel really bad for anyone who didn't pick it up when it came out, because it's available, but it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and it's just a real shame because it's just such a fun reference. It's a great resource. It's a fun reference guide. This type of stuff shouldn't be that expensive, but it really is. Hey, what's up, Josh? Good to see you. Thanks for sending that info about some of those book advertisements. Really appreciate that. Yeah, it's a great guide. Yeah. Oh, it's huge. Yeah, it's hugely sought after now. Well, again, it's the it's interesting, right? The way markets work. It's very costly now, and so it's inducing people to produce the product, to buy and stuff. It's funny, but I remember there was a bit of a splash made about this. I don't know why I remember this, but maybe late last year when one of the writers on the new canon side, one of the writers I think working on the High Republic project, had tweeted that he had splurged and picked it up. And again, this this always further drives speculation that there's something happening, with the Old Republic on the new canon side or something. And I think he was probably just picking it up just, for sort of like deep background about different ideas for world building and stuff. But I remember that probably helped drive a little bit more interest in this and more demand. And yeah, the prices are just insane. Yeah. Oh, and that's the thing, beat up copy. I mean, I keep alluding to this. I was in a Discord server chat today where we were talking about some of this stuff, and someone shared a screenshot of or a snapshot of part of their collection, and everyone honed in on the mint condition Old Republic encyclopedia that, again, he just bought at the time and didn't even think anything of it. And it's just, it being a thing, you could get $500 for it maybe now. It's just insane. It's just so sad. Yeah, I think, no, again, thanks a lot, Josh. So yeah, that's definitely one up there that comes to mind for sure in the reference guide territory. There's a lot of reference guides too that are getting harder and harder to find, and things that people are getting more obscure too. I mean, that people forget about, or people dismiss. There's a quasi reference guide that I think is really fun. It's I'm going to forget the name. Someone will probably be able to help me here, but it was by Catherine Rush. And it's like the diplomatic corps exam, or sort of, I just gotta look this up. Someone will probably know what I'm talking about. It's diplomatic corps entrance exam. And what's so cool about it is that it just seems like kind of like a throwaway tie-in cash grab. It's kind of got like a trivia sort of book feel to it, but like it's kind of cool because it's like got EU trivia. So it's like it's kind of a deep dive into EU lore up to that point. Like mid 90s ish Bantam era. Christine Catherine Rush, who we know from just our EU history was supposed to have a much bigger role in shaping the future of the EU, and you could see just how much she knew about it in that book. It's a fun guide. It's, again, as I say, it's often dismissed. I don't know that it's hard to get, but it just got me thinking about ones that are just like totally forgotten now, and that's kind of sad. So I did see his list. Yeah, he's got the most unique list. Yeah, for sure. And his I'm waiting for him to do his bottom 10 too, which is also pretty eccentric. And although one thing I have to say about his list that I thought was interesting, well, he cheated, right, by the number of times that he would count a trilogy as one row, or whatever. But his list, I kind of skimmed it because I kind of know what his thoughts are on this over the years. But if I remember correctly, I mean, it's fairly dominated by kind of older stuff, right? I mean, like Bantam era stuff, obviously the daily stuff, the Lando trilogy. But given that I'm sort of from the same generation as him, like I can appreciate how there's like a lot of kind of like Bantam era stuff there. I sort of feel like you just and I would put some of those eccentric Bantam choices in there as well. Although again, his bottom list and my bottom list would be completely different. I mean, the fact that he thinks I, Jedi is the worst EU book to me is is bonkers. But hey, what are you going to do, right? Different strokes for different folks. Top 10 books, but 8 of them were series. It's tricky. It's yes, right? Well, that would be fun. It would really be interesting to see someone say, let's take a series and break it down. Like, let's have, I think it'd be a fun video. Would be like, let's rank order the New Jedi Order or something, right? Or the X-Wing books or something. That would be interesting, I think. Oh, cool. I'm glad it was translated. That's kind of fun. Yeah, his top 10 list is really like 30 or 40, exactly. So, the other book, or the other title, and this is, I think, the only, well, it's one and a half of these items is comics, because the Ewoks annual has some sort of prose stories in it, the one that I mentioned, at the beginning of the stream. But the final one here is the Son of Dathomir trade paperback. This is confusing. So there's 2 versions of it, right? And a lot of times you would be able to say something like, oh, we'll get the one pre-Legends banner. Well, what's so confusing about Son of Dathomir, and I've made a video about this years ago, and it's, to my surprise, it's still one of the most controversial videos I've made, if the comments are any indication. Son of Dathomir is one of very few things that is actually part of both canons, right? Alongside the Clone Wars TV show and the Clone Wars movie, right? So for some reason, that's very controversial, and there's still a lot of confusion about this. And there's confusion on all sides. There are occasionally people on the new canon side who question whether it really is part of the new canon. Well, they've made that abundantly clear. There are probably more people on the EU side who question whether it's really part of the EU, and they do so for a variety of reasons. One reason is obviously, in many of these people's cases, they just don't like anything related to the Clone Wars. And to the extent that it's based on some unproduced Clone Wars scripts, they say, get rid of it. When 2014 decanonization occurred and when Clone Wars got reintroduced in the new canon, their point of view is take it all away, right? I'm not of that view. I'm of the view that, anything that came before that announcement, right, is for better or worse part of the EU, and we need to deal with that, right? Son of Dathomir was planned, intended. That comic was not really, tweaked in any way that isn't, it is part of the EU. So there is a trade paperback version of it that is not, the new canon trade paperback version. They later reprinted it. So there's a version of it you can get that's very clearly branded as part of the new canon, but the original version, sort of like the quote unquote Legends version, is very expensive and very hard to find in a really good condition for anything less than, you're easily getting into the $100 territory and well beyond. So good luck tracking it down. I mean, it's one of those things. I remember there was such confusion about, and at least this is how I remember it. I mean, as people were trying to make sense of the decanonization announcement, I remember some people being like, good, great. I don't have to then collect, Clone Wars stuff, right? And I sense a little bit of that in some people who are resistant to the idea that Son of Dathomir is part of both canons, because they go, it's too expensive. I'm glad it's not part of our canon. I don't have to get it anymore. Well, it is. It's part of both, right? And so you don't have to get it, right? But if you want the full, say, trade collection, it's something you're going to have to deal with. And if I remember correctly, and I'm not huge. Oh, thanks, Scott. You actually anticipated what I was going to say. Exactly. I'm curious if it'll be reprinted there as well. I don't really keep up in a big way with the Epic collections, but so I don't know if there's any talk about that. You probably know better than me. It'd be really interesting to see. I think I heard a rumor though that if it hasn't already happened, that's their plan. I think so. They've got a good sort of sense of what is and what isn't. So. That'll be kind of neat. Hopefully that'll be kind of a definitive statement for a lot of folks. Yeah, that's a huge point of contention too with a lot of folks. And again, I don't want to judge anyone who's like too confused about this, because look, let's be totally honest. And one of the biggest complaints I've had about the 2014 decision was the way in which it was made. I was just getting in some conversations with some folks this week about, even after all these years, about, what were even some of the public facing reasons that they offered for why they were doing this. And it's amazing how there's just such confusion around even that announcement. That confusion, I think, is what started partly to lead to lots of bad rumors about the EU to begin with, right? The fact that the announcement was so both ham-fisted and vague in general. It did what? It allowed lots of people to then kind of like just impose and impute some sort of real reason into it. They needed to make sense of it. The announcement didn't really provide a framework. It left a couple of clues here and there, but it's the beginning of then people feeling comfortable to say, well, based on something I can read into the announcement, I think what they're saying is the EU was this. The EU was inconsistent. Well, they said it there, but they didn't, right? But you're reading that into it, right? They go, oh, well, the EU was a big mess. Oh, the EU wasn't canon. None of that came out of the announcement. That's what people read into it. So I always give people a little bit of good faith when it comes to them making sense of like what separates the canon and the EU, because Lucasfilm has been of almost no help on this, right? But then again, I always thought it was almost superficially easy when it comes to the season 7 stuff, where it's like, this is not, yeah, this is new stuff, right? So pretty straightforward. That's surprising and unfortunate. Yeah, that kind of bums me out. Yeah, it is kind of sad to look back at the Brian Wood stuff as kind of, as a result, as in some ways kind of a beginning of the end, for the EU. You look back now retroactively and you're like, yeah, that level of kind of disregard was being given, and the lack of kind of nuance and stuff. And I mean, I even remember, my bigger concern going back to 2015 or so, or early 2016, was when, I'm trying to remember, there was something getting reprinted as early as then that was like, they were clearly putting some Infinity stuff, just put the big Legends banner. I mean, that's when it was clear to me that the Legends banner, it kind of lacked any real analytic meaning beyond just a licensing logo. And so I don't get too worked up about it, but it's, but the non-Infinities thing is definitely frustrating. Yep, they do. Yeah. So, well, I have to say, I agree. I'm been very happy with the Epic collection, and it's neat to see that given the way they've mapped it out, even though they haven't filled in all the gaps, they have a sense of what those gaps are. And I have to give props to Marvel, who, again, I am eternally grateful for pushing for years for something like Marvel 108, and then for delivering. And I hope they continue to press for Marvel 109 and beyond. But they've done a great job with the Epic program, and I'm excited to see too that they're actually now confident, based on those sales presumably, to actually be investing in Legends era omnibus content as well. And it's just been announced that there's going to be an omnibus of the Empire run, which is great. So wow, I mean, so now we've got KOTOR, we've got some like. We've got, I mean, going back a couple of years, we've got like Ewoks and Droids comics published as part of the Omnibus program. Now we're going to be getting Star Wars Empire. Hopefully Dark Times will be coming next. I mean, this is a really exciting move, I think. And something that's really exciting for anyone who is frustrated that the Epic collections often seem to go out of print and are consequently super expensive. I suppose we could just add like older Epic collections to this list of impossible and hard to find and out of reach EU. Here's the really good news for folks following the comic industry. Ever since last year, the different like big companies have been like leaving diamond distributors who had this like effective monopoly over comics distribution and had for years. I'm actually, where I live, was the hub of the next to last major distributor before Diamond basically gained the monopoly. And so all of the sort of the folks that worked in that industry were kind of holding on, are still around, and are at the comic shops, and always feed this fun insight about that whole world. Well, the interesting thing about what Marvel did recently is they've been bouncing around, but they've now switched specifically to Random House Penguin as a distributor. Now, there's some good things and some bad things about that. The good thing for consumers and for us EU fans who are interested in finding the old Epic collection stuff at a reasonable price is the fundamental point of contention that Penguin Random House had with Marvel is that Marvel really sucks at making available trades and collections when they're needed, right? So when some new TV show comes out on Netflix or something that's Marvel related, well, where the hell are the fresh trades for the direct market? They just didn't bother to sort of do any sort of like alignment on, reprints and stuff, right? Random House is putting an end to that. So, and I've already noticed recently, like the Epic collection, like Thor and Captain America, I mean, they are pumping this stuff out now. It's almost too much to keep up with. It's super exciting. So I I bet that sooner than later we're going to see some reprints of some of the Epic Collection EU content that's fallen out of print. So that'll be really great, and hopefully they'll keep that going pretty robustly going forward. Yeah, thanks for reminding me about Star Trek. I do want to. I would love to do a thing where I kind of just go through every Star Trek book, like not in a way that like Matt Wilkins has done, nothing too in depth, but just like kind of like speed, sort of like a kind of like a speed read through the Star Trek lit verse, whatever. I think it'd be fun just to kind of go through the whole thing, talk about some of the mainline It might be worth to do that actually, starting with sort of like the post Nemesis relaunch or something, where there is more of a kind of a mainline continuity. But I would love to do something more about Star Trek. I think that would be cool. And this is only slightly related to this. For years, this is very difficult to talk about. For years, my big three has always been the EU, Star Trek Litverse, and Doctor Who. And Doctor Who is very tricky and doesn't actually share the same sort of concern for continuity in some ways. Of course, by definition, it wouldn't. The Doctor is a time traveler. Anything can happen, right? Any continuity is whatever he wants to make or remake it. But it's become a little bit more of like a rat race. The number of Big Finish audio stories is too much to keep up with. The books stopped sort of sparking joy, and they were taking up room. And so I made a really painful but pretty major decision to start unloading all of my Doctor Who book collection. And now I'm just sort of keeping the things that I just know I'll want to reread. And that's tough because there are many, many hundreds, and it's so fun, and it's been a lifetime of collecting, but it's just time. And it's tricky too, because I spent time in the UK where at different points when Doctor Who has been more popular than it is now. And it's like, those were fun times, and they were also easier times to be a Doctor Who fan interested in sort of the broader extended universe media tie-in, because to be a Doctor Who fan in North America is to be just hated and resented by the BBC. They make it impossible to keep up with stuff in any real time. The Doctor Who magazine takes months to get here. They've begun this, or they've completed basically this very ambitious crossover project of the Time Lord Victorious. This is a deep dive for anyone into Doctor Who, which maybe no one on this stream, so I apologize, but where they were doing something very EU-esque and very consciously connecting through audio stories and magazine short stories and comics and two novels, and even like they created like an action figure line through Eagle Moss, this really cool integrated story. And it's basically been impossible to keep up with in any real time, and you got to then stay offline and avoid spoilers and stuff. And it's also a weird fandom too, because some of the same nonsense you see in some of the Star Wars fandom about, everything has to turn into a tirade against something you don't like. It's the same thing with Doctor Who too, which has actually then really affected the kind of like say the YouTube community on Doctor Who, because every Doctor Who YouTuber is going through what I've gone through. And instead of talking about more Doctor Who, they just talk about how they kind of want to leave the community. And it's just such a mess. It's just not a fun place to be anymore. So I've made a really hard decision just to sort of like free up some cash, free up some space. But I, with the major exception of some of the now ongoing Star Trek stuff I've talked about in previous videos, I don't follow Discovery or Picard or stuff. I'm holding on to everything prior to that Star Trek. So I'm not going to let that stuff go. So I'm going to really dig in on, the EU, obviously, which I'll never let go of, and Star Trek, at least for the time being. We'll see. It just tends to do something, I guess, in the end that makes me spark more joy. And the thing too is, I've also made this point. Star Wars is tricky if you're just an EU guy, because you've got a couple of TV shows, you've got a couple of movies, but it's really about the books and the comics and the games and stuff. Doctor Who, if I really, if I go into one of my Doctor Who phases, well, there's almost 60 years of TV shows, right? And so I can kind of get that fix there, right? And I know that would be kind of like sacrosanct to say in the Star Wars context. You'd be like, what? Like, you just want to watch the movies and the shows? You don't want to dive into the books and comics? It's a different sort of story. The books and comics don't always relate, right? But then again, there's definitely some Doctor Who things to hold on to. And I think one thing I've been thinking about too is, and this kind of comes back to your question, Weasel, related to the Star Trek person, whether I plan to do any videos or streams. One video idea or set of ideas I had is talk about kind of like the wink wink crossovers in other franchises to the EU or Star Wars. And so there's definitely some in Doctor Who. There's a book that I talk about from time to time. It's from the 10th Doctor's run called Forever Autumn. And I read it every fall. I'm just nostalgic for it, and it's like takes place in the fall around Halloween. And the only bad thing about it is that clearly the author does not know how to write in the voice of American teenagers who all sound incredibly British. But there's a fun little cutesy little aside in it where it's revealed that George Lucas, it's revealed that Star Wars is real. Right, all those things actually happened, and George Lucas knows about them because he's dreaming about them. He's sort of psychically dreaming and connecting with this world that actually exists, and like in that, even the Doctor has met Jar Jar. Kind of a fun thing. How does this all relate to Star Trek? Barbara Hamley, an EU author, of course, is also a Star Trek author and has a book from early in the Pocket era original series where there's a couple of cameos that are made. One is by Han Solo. Strongly suggested Han Solo. The other strongly suggested the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker. So there is a Star Trek book by an EU author in which both original series characters, Doctor Who, and Han Solo appear. So that's cool. So in my headcanon, they're all connected. Anyway, speaking of Maul, what do I think of the Visionary story? I think that the first time I read it, which I remember clearly because I remember being in the store, picking up the trade and flipping through, and was kind of like, that's kind of fan fiction-y, but then again, that's what this is supposed to kind of be, Visionaries. And then when it happened in the Clone Wars, thinking, oh, I guess that it was one of those first moments where I was like, oh, I guess this like stuff that's intentionally supposed to be kind of like infinities can become non-infinities. And then in a weird way, I was kind of starting to think, okay, I do like it. So long story short, I kind of like it, even though when I first read it, I thought, cool, well done, but feels a little fan fiction-y, but I guess it's not anymore technically, right? So it's funny, Weasel, your questions about Star Trek, they always get me going on little rants, so I really appreciate it. So I am more inspired than ever to talk more about Star Trek, which maybe it alienates this audience, but damn it, I'm gonna do it. So I would, good question. Well, both. How about that? I'll split the difference. I'd say get both. The hardcover versions are way more expensive, are going to be harder to track down, and the paperback versions have short stories in them in some cases. So if you had to pick, and I can't believe I'm saying this because aesthetically I prefer hardcover, but if I had to pick, I'd go paperback. But of course, they all look good. The hardcover versions, you should know, and maybe already do, are not some were published in hardcover and paperback. Some were only published in paperback. So if you get the hardcover versions of some of them, they're going to be from Science Fiction Book Club, and they're not going to be the same height as the other hardcovers. That's something to keep in mind if that matters to you. It's going to look kind of weird, right? So you couldn't go wrong with just getting paperback because at least, as I say, you'll get the short stories that are attached in some cases. I presume this is going back to the decanonization announcement, and yes, indeed, that is one of the one of the many logical problems with some of the arguments that were then originated from that ham-fisted announcement. Josh, I can't remember now. I wonder if this relates to the fact that does this relate to the like the weird naming of the Epic collection, where like it was called Tales of the Jedi, but it should have been Dawn or something like that. I think I saw something about that. Very confusing. Yeah, the Wood Star Wars run. Again, it's sort of easy to see this in retrospect, but it clearly felt like some wheels were starting to roll off the wagon. Sort of the control over the greater concern for tighter continuity was starting to fall away. I wasn't really hip to the fact that the Brian Wood stuff was sort of self-consciously supposed to be sort of like quasi-rebooted. And I remember reading the first issue. I remember where I was very well, and I remember thinking like, I just the entire time in this like very perplexed look on my face, like I don't understand how this is happening. I was confused in general that there was now rebooted number one, but thinking cynically, okay, that's just what comics have to do from time to time. It was only years later that I realized it was Matt Wilkins clued me into that. I was really not aware of it for a very long time, that it was that Wood himself was very self-consciously attempting to do that. And I think that I've talked about this recently on some stream where it's like even the editor, Dark Horse, I think he kept backtracking. I think he thought this was going to be a cool way of getting new people on board, but even he started to backtrack about that, and it's unfortunate. But yeah, the Empire and Rebellion book trilogy, the kind of contrived trilogy, what a weird way to go out. What a weird way to go out. Some's good, some's okay. Yep. Oh yeah. Yep. Infinities in chronological order might be interesting. Yeah, for sure. I kind of hope they someday. I get this won't happen now, but I always wish there was a prequel Infinities. I thought that'd be cool. Fall of the EU, yeah. Yeah, well, but Dylan, you shared something really interesting that I think you should share more widely. It's the I can't remember if it was like the New York Times bestseller list or like the sales charts or something, right? So it turns out that all of the EU books, even at the end of the run, were all bestsellers, right? We're doing great. And so I think that like one of the sort of the myths we really need to sort of counter is this idea that like that a reboot was necessary to sort of kind of like reawaken the like the market interest in this stuff, which really wasn't in decline. And the most amazing thing to me though is it not to contradict myself, it's possible that there was some say dip in comics. The reason I say it is what's so fascinating about the comic analysis from Marvel 108 is that Marvel 108 issue was not only was it outselling most canon comics when it came out in 2019, but its numbers were objectively better than a lot of EU comics in sort of the heyday. It's really interesting. So I don't know that means the EU interest was declining. It actually probably means that interest has grown ever since. Ironically, I guess we have Disney to thank for that, the increase in interest in the EU. Yeah, real mixed bag, real mixed bag, for sure. 7 of the 9. Yeah, pretty cool, pretty amazing. It's possible the end of the EU ended in 2008 and Force Unleashed, no matter how you feel. Force Unleashed I like, but I mean, come on. I mean, the way it plays and bends with the lore it is a little hard at first to sort of work past. You have to set some things aside, I think, if you're being totally and actually honest. But it's but I still do like it. Actually, I do like both that and 2, believe it or not. Certainly the EU sort of adaptations of them. But it's funny though. There's just so many different sort of factions of the movement that would, or the fandom that would point to lots of different years. Again, I've talked before, people who think it was over with the new Del Rey license in '99 and stuff, and or who thinks it was over and when Droids and Ewoks went off the air in the '80s, right? So yeah, but you can definitely look back, and in fact, almost half. In some ways, the Clone Wars does present an interesting challenge to the extent that stuff does very consciously start to sort of contradict some from lore and other directions. Recently in EU, you have to start to sort of say, yeah, like something was changing, right? If the EU never had been rebooted, if it was to continue on a certain path, it would have been heavily influenced by whatever would have come as a result of continued Clone Wars content. So it might not have looked like the end, but would have looked like a new change of direction for sure, right? So, and again, who knows? As a result, depending on your view of the Clone Wars, maybe the decanonization was a blessing in disguise. Kind of stopped the internal bleeding, right? Then again, it prevented us from ever getting any formal retcons or way of explaining it away. So double-edged sword. Hey, Leia the cat. Oh, greetings from the UK. Fantastic. Been talking a lot about the UK today. There is constantly a lot to talk about in the context of the EU and the UK, both in terms of obviously Star Wars being filmed there originally, but also tons of EU, exclusives and stuff only available for the UK market. So good to see you. Well, that too. Yep. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I think I might have to end soon on this, but I will end by talking about the end. That there is sort of this idea of kind of the kind of like the Holy Trinity, right? That kind of kept all the EU together. And it is sort of the three pillars, so to speak, to kind of butcher some framework that Lucas himself used in a different context years ago. There is Lucas himself. There is Lucas/Lucasfilm, like the licensing and the people involved in maintaining the continuity, and Lucas himself. There's us, the readers, the fandom, who try and hold them to account. And then there are the authors, the old EU authors, who we also hold to account, and who themselves, I think, often tried to hold one another to account, and even Lucasfilm from time to time. So again, it was I think these three things working sort of together kept the EU going. And I think that when Sue or Steve or someone or Rothman start to walk away, that pillar starts to break down, right? And there's fewer sort of forces at work trying to keep it all together, right? I think when Lucas walks away, that's probably the fatal blow in some sense, right? Because all of a sudden, he's not there to delegate in some way to Lucasfilm what Lucasfilm needs to do to keep everything consistent, right? Why wouldn't they? I mean, they're totally free to reboot then, right? He's not there to sort of say, well, don't reboot, maybe refashion, rework, retcon. When the authors start to go away, when the authors aren't invited back all of a sudden, when they feel like other authors are doing things differently or other editors are doing things differently. Again, when Brian Wood is encouraged by Dark Horse to sort of go off the rails and sort of, provide a soft reboot of the comic run, right? It's just starting to fall apart. When people just started making these unilateral breaks for it, right? When Dave Filoni, as he admits on like behind the scenes discs on the Clone Wars DVDs, starts doing things that Lucas told him not to do, people start making a break for it, right? And then all you're left with is a couple lone voices at Lucasfilm in one pillar. The people left behind and the authors sort of pen, and a few people left in that pillar, and then the fandom who starts to walk away because after 2014 they just so it all fell apart, And I think so. The key to sort of building the EU back is like, I think we need at least two of those pillars, right? It would be great to have a core of those old EU authors who want to sort of keep this going, and of course the fandom who like keeps interest alive. But here is the very, very disconcerting question that I ask, sort of rhetorically, of everyone. Yeah, probably, yeah, and not the worst analogy in the world. But here's the very disconcerting, disquieting sort of analogy to sort of consider. We could build back the fandom pillar. We are it, right? We are the remnant holding that part of the pillar up. We support that pillar by being here. There is a hardcore of the old sort of faction, the old guard, like the writers and voices within Lucasfilm trying to hold up that pillar. But without Lucas, maybe the most essential pillar, right, is a continuation of the EU possible? How important is he? We know he didn't. I mean, we know. Look, he didn't write the EU. He wasn't. But he was the sort of the moral authority, right? Delegating the responsibility to Lucasfilm to keep it all consistent, providing sort of this like spreading the light, the inspiration for the author pillar to sort of keep it going, right? Inspiring us to kind of want to know more about where the story is going, the story that started with his vision. With him gone, maybe the EU continuing actually isn't possible in some way if you take that three-pillar process seriously. But I think that analyzing the end of the EU, pre-2014, I think starts with understanding how those pillars started to break down. So that is the question of the day, of the week, of the year, of the fandom. Is continuing EU possible without George? something to consider. I don't know. What about you?